Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the show. Another brilliant guest with us today. Welcome, Natalie Bell.
Hello. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, Richie and I are super delighted to have you on because you are a media powerhouse and a very lovely person, if I may say so, at an early stage in the proceedings. So let me do a bit about Natalie, just so you know who we have with us today. So Natalie is CEO of OMD, a high-profile media agency and a super respected and liked person in the industry. More awards than you can shake a stick at. So I'm only going to mention a very small fraction. But currently, so 2024 Campaign UK Media Agency of the Year, and Natalie herself, Campaign's UK Media Agency Leader of the Year. But more broadly and over time, a catalogue of awards, the most awarded media agency in the history of IPA effectiveness. And right up there in the Sunday Times Best Places to Work. And I think that reflects you, Natalie, in terms of your approach to work and life. But so many more awards that it's literally, you would take the whole interview. But you've been there a long time, I think maybe 17 years working up through the ranks. And I know you're a very curious and empathetic and driven person. And I'm sure that's really at the heart of it. Started out in magazine publishing, and we'll go into a bit about the trade of breadcrumbs. But just to give a flavour of today, we're really going to get into the power of media. We're going to be talking about leadership. We're also going to be talking about personal leadership and some of the things that you've picked up yourself along the way. So brilliant to have you here, Natalie. And I'm really looking forward to getting going.
Oh, thank you very much. Again, that was all very nice and kind. So thank you, Mark.
Hey, Mark brought us in easy. So let's start with the tough questions. I'm just kidding. How's it going, Natalie? It's a pleasure to have you on.
So, I mean, I've said it already, you are a powerhouse in the media industry and you are evangelical about, if not vitriolic about the power of media. So just tell us about your macro perception of the role of media in advertising, marketing, society, etc.
Yeah, it's I'm actually known for a statement. I don't know if this is swearing anymore or not, but I'm known for the statement, I bloody love media. And I genuinely do. My team genuinely do. It's the craft of media planning for me is just wonderful because it just spans all the most amazing things you can think about, from audience insights and understanding to what's changing in terms of, what we're consuming in this incredible world that we live in and all these touch points that we have around us, and culture, and then the variety of client businesses that we get to work across in all different categories. And then finally, measurements, which is critical within all of that. And I think, the thing that underpins that is the creativity and the ability to push and innovate and iterate constantly. So I do bloody love media. It has been an industry that has given me a lot. And so it is an industry that I do evangelize about, because I actually think we're often the sort of the workhorse, the unsung hero bit of the marketing mix, and I say that with the utmost respect of the clients I work with and the incredible creative agencies and other agency partners we work with. We're a very sort of collaboratively challenging agency, I think, but actually, I think when you look at marketing, it's often the creative that's celebrated. Naturally, it's the most visible or audible of all of it. And actually, the media bit sort of gets reduced down to either something too complex for people to talk or think about, or it becomes a volume and a data and a scale and a buying piece. And so I think we need to champion it more. If we think about the UK, our advertising spend in media has increased year on year with only a small stop in COVID. And even then, actually, because the government was still spending, we didn't drop. And we're spending, forecasts would say around 40 billion a year in media. And so it is incredibly important to get that right. And I think it's an awful shame when it's thought about from an overall spend perspective as a place to make efficiencies all the time, rather than, how you can increase the effectiveness of what we do. So I do love media. I think we should champion it more. There was a moment for me earlier this year when I realised we'd been through 3 months of incredible articles in Campaign in our trade press, for which we had played a part in all of them. There were probably, I think, something like 18 different campaigns across our clients. And yet the media bit was the sort of subline, media planned and bought by Manning Gottlieb OMD, by MG OMD. And the creative was the hero. So I just think we've got a task to elevate the conversation around the importance it plays in the mix. I know it's not always about trade press, but it's about how front of mind we are in those conversations.
Gosh, I completely agree, and you've already sold me on this. So there you are. But it's a fascinating space and place, and I think you talk to that notion that sometimes people from the outside may find that it is quite complicated, and actually there's a big role. Perhaps 101 is about that demystification of media, and I'm always reminded of perhaps what is now a slightly dated quote from Seth Godin when he talks about the TV industrial complex. Probably rung through your world in the agency many years. That thought about TV being dominant and how the cycle of that sort of worked, and now it's sort of coming to a much more fragmented place and space. And I wonder if you have a thought or an opinion about sort of more that fragmentation of media and how you perhaps demystify it when the world is looking slightly more complicated than what was the TV industrial complex of decades gone by.
Yeah, and look, we every year there's a new channel, for want of a better word. This year it's retail media, and we do. Media is complicated. There's no two ways about it. But we are in danger often of overcomplicating it. I sort of strange curveball thought, but I studied languages when I was coming up through university, and I think there's an interesting thing when you've learned language that if you speak to a non-native English speaker, you naturally adapt your style of speaking to make sure that it's easy to understand and you're not using superfluous language. I think it's the same with media. I think we have to constantly adapt how we're talking to who to make sure it's, super clear, and we're not trying. I think, there's demystifying it and then there's overcomplicating it so that we sound smart about what we do. Now, it is complicated, so it's important that we're not losing that. But to your point about fragmentation, if we take the different media channels that we now have at our disposal to reach consumers, to influence consumers, and for consumers to buy through, it is fragmented, but we have to hold some of the basics of marketing true within those media channels. As I said earlier, audiences. I loved, during COVID, I know, apologies to go back to that, we went back to basics on media planning because where people were, what they were doing, what they were consuming, and how they bought changed completely. So we had to sort of rethink what we were doing and go back to the basics, which I actually really enjoyed because it stripped out some of that, the over complication. But we are ever moving to a world of a fully addressable media marketplace. That is not far off. And that's even within the TV landscape in terms of how it's planned, delivered and bought and measured. And so we need to go back to some of the simplicity of what we're trying to do, but plug that into that world. And then we need to be able to measure it. And I think that the challenge becomes, and I'll talk about origin for a second, the challenge becomes one of shifting our whole marketplace, our whole industry. The scale and the cost of something like origin as measurement, as cross-media measurement, is huge. We're completely shifting what we're doing. And there's no wonder that it's slow in some people's opinions and hard and carries a lot of debate with different opinions, because we need to completely pivot what we're doing as a marketing industry in some of these spaces to a very different world. But for me, fundamentally, the approach and the basics never change. It's just the how you implement that does, and where.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. It's still the fundamental. Fascinating to hear about some of that. I'm curious to know how it all began for you from a career perspective, and what the trail of breadcrumbs were that led you to where you are now. So give everyone a bit of a flavour of the journey.
Oh yeah, gosh, I could do this for a long time. So so as I said, I studied language and economics actually, and I came out of university and was being sort of pushed into the city. It was either the city or a translator job, which wasn't ready for me. So I got pushed, and then I just took a break and a pause and a moment, went travelling, as many people did. You wouldn't know it from how I talk about all of that I'm actually from a pretty modest background in Portsmouth, and so I've always sort of strived and pushed. I was the only person in my school to go to university, and I've always pushed. I came back and I looked. I was going to say I searched. I can't even remember what the search engine was at the time, but I searched for something that had a combination of creative and commercial within it. And I was extremely lucky to happen upon a publishing assistant role at IPC Media. And you couldn't get a more perfect role, and little did I know at the time. So that was my sort of first moment of luck. And I worked for some incredible people within IPC, and then went on to become Time Inc. and subsequently it's sort of been broken up. But it was incredible to work in publishing, because in magazines, you, as a publisher, you ran a P&L for a magazine. And that involved understanding the different parts of that business across editorial, production. I'd know paper stock and the implication of that on our commercials, to the marketing of it, to selling that to agencies and advertisers. You've got the fully rounded piece. And I can tell you now, price elasticity in magazines is incredible, because you really understand it. And I was in weekly magazines as well. You really understand it week in, week out. And you're there with the consumer every week, changing your product, seeing the response. So it could not have been a more perfect 7 years for me, really, working in that space. But at the end of it, I moved into a role which was around digital. So I did a PPA diploma in publishing, and my project was to build a website. And there was already digital activity going on in the business, but it wasn't, it was definitely a moment where it was hard to push digital in a magazine business. And all those component parts that I just talked about struggled with what I was saying was important. And so a very, very lovely mentor of mine at the time had moved over to Omnicom, and she asked if I'd like to come over to the agency world and do a digital role. And I said, yes, absolutely, I trust you. I do not know what the agency world looks like. Let me meet some people. I talked through and sort of made up the story of digital advertising just based off of what I'd researched. And they said, come in, we'd love to have you in. I came in as a digital strategist. And interestingly, going back to my roots and my studies, they said, we've got a small digital department, and then we've got a planning department and a client department, and we'd like you to be the translator between them. And I said, okay. They said, because we think that you talk in plain language about this and you see it from a broader perspective and a marketing perspective, but you also understand some of the intricacies. So that's what I came in to do. And 17 years later, I never looked back. In that time, Facebook launched, and we grew a social department. The world changed completely as Google expanded. And so my role for half of the time at MG was in digital roles. And I'm a very curious person. I love learning. Everything I do is about learning. And so it was amazing to ride that wave of constant innovation and learning, and deliver it within my role and within the business.
I tell you, what a fascinating journey right across, from the way you've been able to sort of make those leaps in your early stages of your career, and then of course the sustained period where you're at here today. You touched on, the changing nature of that landscape just now, as you alluded to Facebook coming in and the social teams that came through. And even in your previous segment, you talked of this, we're soon nearing a fully addressable world. I think we're getting into a stage in the marketing industry where we have, probably more insight and information about, the role of media, and also how marketing sort of operates, the science behind marketing, as it were, of course, popularized by the legend Byron Sharp, and of course followed in his great footsteps by a plethora of other really well-known thought leaders. And I would like to pick up on that for a second, Natalie, because I think you'd be a great person to bounce this off, particularly when it comes to things like the metrics that do matter when it comes to media measurement. Because I think sometimes we get a bit lost, as you say, the complexities around it. But I wondered if, I often read Lumen studies, or I often read studies by Les Binet, or, Peter Field, or, Karen Nelson Field, etc. And I just wonder, what would you say maybe are the top 3 or 4 things that someone who's perhaps sitting as a marketer should be kind of looking out for when it comes to sort of the metrics that make a difference?
It's so interesting, and we have this conversation a lot. We are so guilty of creating a new metric. I mean, first of all, there are an enormous amount of media metrics, okay? And ultimately, I'm not saying they're not important to the marketeer. They're important to us to know that the media has worked within what it's doing, but that's a media metric. That's not an outtake. It's not an outcome. And I think, we need to be very mindful of these indicators of success, but they are an indirect metric that we follow, and they're a delivery metric, and we need to know that what we're buying is delivering for clients. I think we're in danger of creating metrics on metrics when we start to come into outtakes and outcomes. And we do talk about this a lot. It's amazing. We talk about attention now beyond just reach. You mentioned Karen there, and it is, of course, it's important because reach is nothing, if it's not attentive reach. And so we now need to build that into what we're doing. We build in other metrics as well, like carbon calculation. And if that's important to clients, how do we balance the optimization of that on a plan to attention? We also obviously have an enormous amount of metrics that exist in the sales space, and competing methodologies of how to track sales, where that needs a lot of attention and cleaning up and understanding and making sure we are measuring what matters, but equally understanding that even within a client's business, and we work a lot with clients, the biggest challenge within that is silos and competing objectives and KPIs, and therefore the metrics that sit within each of those teams that actually, bring together, and they're not harmonious. And so there isn't that single source of truth that everybody is trying to achieve. So actually the thing that we're trying to do much more now with clients is understand what have you got access to that looks at, the broader, essentially back to the basics. You mentioned some of the academic thinking there, but back to the basics of mental availability, and what are those metrics that we have that allow us to see that. And then the physical availability, and, arguably what we would say now is digital availability, and what are the metrics that would sit under that. And then how are we looking at that single source of truth in sales? And that differs by client in every category, and client's ability to track those. But within that, the client will have different measurement systems. It's just ensuring we simplify them to understand what role they're playing within our overall framework. And then, of course, the biggest challenge of all is representing all of those things to the board, which is obviously one of the biggest topics, and one, Mark, you and I have a bit. It's how do we then simplify that further? So ultimately the board know that advertising is effective. And I think that is the hardest thing, is within each business, simplifying. If I come back to my world, what media is doing in that overall mix to drive that effectiveness. And we had it recently with a client actually that we've just taken on as new business. And as part of the process to be approved as a partner, we had to pitch what we were doing to the CEO of the business. And it was, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think my team found it challenging, but it was brilliant to be reminded of how many things we talk about that really just don't, at that board level, just aren't applicable, understood, or even valued, and to really get into the crux of, when I say a media saving, what does that actually mean to the business? When I talk about media efficiencies, what does that mean? When I talk about pricing, what does that mean? But then importantly, how am I measuring this to know in my business that is going to deliver results? And it forces you to streamline everything and slim it down. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question directly. There's an "it depends" in there, which often complicates things.
Well, I think Natalie, you really have, in the sense of being able to outline what I see as those 5 pillars that you've just you've described and added color for us, right? Clearly the stalwarts of the mental physical availability, the nuance into digital availability, and then the significance of sort of those sales and representing sales at that commerciality. But finally, the added layer on the cake being the representation to the board and to the CEO, which I think the delta is quite significant, and it's something that the marketing function really does struggle with, and how to genuinely represent it in the right, all these various things in the right way. So I think that's really been helpful in understanding what are some of the key tenets to look out for.
It's tricky as well, I think, because of the nature and the complexity in marketing through to media and the structure of teams. We are seeing a resurgence in the head of media role, client side in marketing teams. And I think it's because of the nature of the huge complexity that we have, that there's just not the mental availability within CMOs or the wider team to really understand the detail. But it does mean then we have to simplify what it is we do, to enable people to have a good grasp of it and to understand the effect of it.
So this has been a brilliant tour de force into the media landscape, media dynamics, future of media, measurement, and so on boards. And I want to turn the corner a little bit now and actually focus more in on you. I think that's equally as interesting and valuable for people to hear about. And so you are CEO of a very, very successful company. You've risen up through the ranks. You were the only person at your school who went to university. So there's a story there, isn't there? So where do we start? So let's start with what do you think are the leadership qualities that you really brought that have enabled that accelerated path to leadership?
What I would say is I run a media agency, and like anyone that runs an agency, it's a people business. So, I am responsible and serve, 550 incredible employees. And so I think any leader of an agency in that sense needs to have a great deal of empathy and understanding, and really, really understand what duty of care means when it comes to employees, and understand what it means to help them thrive. But I do also think you need... I've got a certain restlessness that never allows us to stand still, because we're not in a standing still industry, and we have to constantly disrupt what we're doing to ensure that we're keeping up with the disruption itself. And then I'm very decisive, sometimes too much for my team. But I think it is that balance of caring but also being clear. So I would say that's what I bring to it. I'm a very curious person, and so I spend an awful lot of time with the media partners that we work with. And again, this is amazing, right? You're spending everything from there's a broadcaster to a search engine to a retail site to creators to there's never a dull day. You're learning constantly and learning how to apply that. But I think, and I've not always been this way, but I think my positive passion for what we do, I hope, is something that sort of flows into the business. I've always been passionate. I think when you're younger, you can get a bit frustrated sometimes. Passion can sort of flow into, especially when you're impatient, which I am. Passion can flow into frustration. But I would say I'm now much more vocally and behaviourally positively passionate, because I'm so lucky to work in the industry I do, genuinely, and so lucky to work in the agency that I do and with the people I do. So
super. And you've totally ruined my next question, Natalie. I was going to ask something totally else, and then you touched on this and you said, sometimes your passion can flow into frustration, and that just really triggered a thought here, because clearly I think that's a symptom of a lot of people perhaps in their early to mid stage of their careers, that it can well happen. And I wondered if given that you've probably been through it yourself, and you probably, have members in your team who are going through it, what advice would you have for people who kind of have that sense of like, oh, I am feeling a bit frustrated, but that's only because I am so passionate about what I'm doing, and yet I can't see a clear path through. How would you overcome that?
Oh, the power of the pause, the breath. I think that's always a good learning, isn't it? Look, I think it's really important to recognise areas of development and moments of failure. I'm quite a heart on sleeve person. I'm always open to admitting, when I have got it wrong. But I think also, one thing I talk about a lot internally is I was quite young as a managing director, and I became managing director amongst my peers, and I was really bad at it at first. Not at the capability or the actual job. Any target or goal you gave me, I'd do it. What I was really bad at was behaviourally realising that it wasn't about me. And I spent a long time trying to prove to everyone why I'd got the job. A lot of my behaviour was in trying to almost imitate this behaviour I'd seen before me in the years that I was, coming up through, which was more of a dominant manager, and you're almost trying to lift the hierarchy literally, and it wasn't the right way to behave. And it took someone to say to me, I just say, calm down, you got the job, and it really did. And as soon as I realised it wasn't about me, and actually it wasn't about me proving myself to others, actually they were also trying to prove themselves to me. It was about me getting the most out of them and helping them and supporting them, which I realise is, a very easy thing to say and often said, but it really took something for me to pivot that mindset. And with that, I think came that slight relaxing of the frustrations I was having. With that came a slightly longer term view of things, not just the in the moment view. I also say to anyone that comes up, that is developing in their careers, don't sweat the small stuff. Our brains are busy enough. Don't let the small things. And I know that's, depending on how your brain works, that can be more challenging for some than others. But office politics, looking over at what someone else is doing, these interactions you have, something went wrong, follow up immediately and say, gosh, that I reacted in a way I really shouldn't have there. Don't let it fester. These small things that just keep growing, that take over the mental availability we have to do our jobs. Just try not to sweat those. And the other thing I'd often say is, what's the rush? I think that we are incredibly guilty, and I think it's changing, but we're very guilty as an industry of really celebrating the youngest that did this, the first that did that. And I've learned through the hard way, actually, that there are things in life that do require you to rush, like having children. And I was exceptionally lucky to have my son when I was 35, but then I had secondary infertility because of aging, actually, and so we couldn't have a second child. And that, it's not that I let my career get in the way, but certainly my career was very active alongside my decisions. And what is the rush? What does it matter if you're managing director at 29 versus 34? Really? I mean, I know there are realities to earning money and other things, but it doesn't matter if you get there a year ahead of time or not. But there are other things in life that won't wait for you. So I think we need to stop heralding, this youngest to do things, because life really is I know you have your sprintathon, Mark, but life is a marathon, and I think we need to see careers a little bit more like that.
So I've had a bit of an insider's view to MG. Helped you on a couple of things, and I went to your annual client day, which was lovely, and obviously it's a best foot forward event. You want to, but way beyond that, I got a sense of there is a really special culture around MD. The way you interact with each other, the way some of your clients talk about you when you're not there, which is always a good reality check. And so I'm really curious about how you've created something that is quite special culturally. Tell us what you can about that.
Well, first of all, I inherited it, I would say. And I often say I'm just carrying that torch until the next person. I was very lucky. Both of my predecessors were incredible. But when I inherited it, it wasn't, and I'm not a massive fan of this word, but I'll use it. It wasn't codified. We sort of, you felt it, you didn't know it. And then we scaled very quickly. Actually, we took a real hockey stick of scale. And when you start doing that, you need to codify it, because it can't live in one or two people. And so actually, I'm a massive believer in enormous clarity on purpose, on the purpose of a business or a team, or and so so when I became CEO, we put a lot of work into, what is this feel? What is this magic? What is this culture? This thing that you can't touch, but it's there. And and everyone looks at values, but for us, we went through a long process of really getting everyone's view of that. Because the other thing about culture is it can't live with the leadership team, as you know. Culture is what's living and breathing in everyone in your business, and there's often a disconnect that you don't realize until it really hits you hard. And so we just made sure that we heard from everyone what they were expecting culturally, what they value culturally generally, and what they felt the culture was. And we sort of went through the understanding of those things across all parts of the business. And we as MG OMD were actually born as a media agency in 1990, out of, when media buying was just a corner of a creative agency, out of the idea that you can put imagination into the media, not just into the creative message. And so we've always held on to that. But actually there became a quite apparent thing that people want to know why we're doing what we're doing and what results we're getting from it, whether that be for our clients, in the industry and the responsibility we have with the money that we spend, and the impact that can make in culture and society, but also in terms of what mattered to them. So our purpose is creating difference that matters, and that flows through every part of it. It's not one of those signs on a wall that no one understands. It lives and breathes in everything we do. It informs our strategy. It's part of our people initiatives. It really is. And the importance for us of being clear about that. Honestly, in the time that I've been CEO, it's the one thing that I have been so grateful for, because it's kept us clear on what we do. And we have two different sides to our business, actually. We have incredible private sector clients. So from everything from Virgin Media and Giscaf to Renault and Nissan to Specsavers to, I could honestly keep going on, all of our wonderful clients. And then on the other side, we have the government media buying hub. It's a very big hub run by an amazing colleague of mine, Paul Knight. And public sector is very different to private sector. And so when you talk about creating difference that matters, what matters to government, obviously, in behavioural change in the messaging they're putting out is very different to what matters to Specsavers in ensuring that they're getting people into store and selling glasses. So it allowed that sort of single-mindedness that could stretch. But it's also important that it's what matters to our people. And so we do a lot of work actually in understanding how we can help with climate challenges and climate messaging, because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful Attenborough quote that, climate is now a communications problem. And so we work with the Media Trust on their Communicating Climate programme. We fund that, and we actually give pro bono work. We've done it now for 4 years. Pro bono work to climate charities that would never be able to access, the talent that we have within the business. And that matters to us, it matters to our people. So again, it helps guide, how we apply our strategy and thinking and our plan in everything we do.
Wow. I mean, talk about the codification of some of that secret sauce as you describe. Climate is a comms problem. I love that. Good old Attenborough. Really nice turn of phrase there. Keeping with the thought around the C's, I want to just get your take on careers. And I think perhaps related to the last segment where you talked about, what's the rush. I love some of your thinking where you think that, the ladder doesn't always have to go upwards. It was a nice way of thinking about it. And I suspect during your time as you've been able to venture and finally get up to the lead position, there have been moments where the ladder has, I assume, sideways, if not down, not sure. But love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is it has always gone upwards in the sense that I've created my own roles up until the point that I went into leadership. So I honestly believe in, focus on the goal, not the role. And, I think sometimes we can get too hung up on, I say this as a CEO, I do appreciate that, but, we can get too hung up on a role and therefore what that means. And actually, I think it's super important at any part of your career that you're really thinking on what is it what I want to achieve, what is it that I enjoy, what gives me energy in the morning. I genuinely believe in the power of understanding your own energy. You know when something's not right for you anymore because your body will literally tell you when you wake up in the morning. I'm not saying I'm always the first out of bed, but it does tell you a lot, the energy that you bring to stuff. But it's so for years within MG, my next role never existed, and so I was lucky to work in an environment where, I grew a social part of our business, and therefore that was my role to lead that. And then I grew something else, that was my role to do that. And I brought a new client in, and that changed us, and that. So I think focusing on the goal of growth is more important. And that brings me to where I am now. And I never, by the way, never intended to be MD, never intended to be CEO. It just came with the growth. And actually, I don't know how I'll ever leave my agency because I genuinely love it so much. I think people might have to push me out. But I'm then going, well, what is that ladder now? And actually, I think it is, if you're focusing on the goal, which for me is growth, it can go outwards as much as upwards. And so now what I do is I'm a trustee of NABS, which is our charity's industry that looks after the mental wellness of our charity. Doesn't have anywhere near the awareness that it should for such an incredible entity. I sit on the front foot advertising board, which gives me access and growth to so many other parts of our wonderful industry, and thinking about sustainability trust, talent. And I'm part of WAC. I'm a member of WACL. My growth and my goal has gone outwards rather than thinking what's my next role. And I just hope through that, something else will come over time when I need it to. But I think it is really important to understand what growth means to you. And I think we're slightly addicted sometimes to this ladder being the growth, and it, and sometimes it's not always about that.
Yeah, Natalie, that's unfortunately we timed out. That's a great place to leave it. For people to hold that thought, and it was symptomatic of everything you said, which is about balance, ambition, very much in the right way, passion for your industry and what you do, creating great culture, very humble. I just inherited it. I just codified it. I was very fortunate at this, and so on and so forth. I suspect you probably really underplayed the pivotal impact you've had. But I think this has been it's been so much more than media, and we've got a lot on that, but so much more than that. So Natalie, thank you very much for your time today. It's been great to have this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you for looking after me. That was very lovely. Thank you.